Hi, this is Paul Neale at Penn Productions, and in this class today we're going to learn how to create an eyeball and also be able to rig it up and have it function and work as it should. So we're going to start off with our Vincent character we've been using for some of the other tutorials, and I'm just going to go into the left viewport here, and I'm going to make the head see-through with Alt-X so that we can see through and see what we're doing. Now the way we're going to do this is actually with a lathe. We're not going to build a sphere. A lot of people start with that. To me that's much more difficult to work with. So we're just going to start off straight up with a circle, and we're going to start working with that. Now I've got a layer here hidden. I'm just going to work in the base layer, and so we want to create a circle and get it about the right size. Now of course your eyeball is much bigger than the opening that we see. And we need to determine how big that's going to be. So we're going to be able to play with that a little bit as we need be. Now I'm never going to scale this. I want to make sure that I use the tools available to us for doing it without scaling. So I want to up the radius here a bit and figure it's probably going to be about there, let's say. Now the next thing I want to do is I want to make a copy of this. So Control V, and I want to make a copy, not an instance. And I want to make a copy of that, and I'm just going to reduce the radius on this one just a little bit so that it's sitting inside. What we're going to do is we're going to create a two-part eyeball in a sense. The outer, which is the glossy, shiny, transparent layer, and the inner layer, which is going to contain all the colors, so things like the white area, the iris, and of course the pupil itself. So that's going to be on this inner one. Now we're going to attach these two together. So let's just convert down to an edible spline, and we'll go and grab the attach, and we're just going to attach the two together so that we've got the pieces as one here. Now we can cut this in half. We don't need all of this. We can eliminate half it. So I'm going to just hit 2 on the keyboard and grab the bottom half and get rid of it, because we're going to lathe it around. So on top of the stack, let's add lathe now and take a look at what we've got. So the lathe modifier, and of course that doesn't look much like an eyeball, and we need to pick the correct axis, and in this case it's going to be X. So that's going to give us an eyeball that's round and whatnot. Now we're going to go for a pretty high res one. We're not going games. So what I want to do is increase the amount of segments around it. So we could go with something like 36, let's say, and that'll give us more segments to be able to work with. So with 36 segments, we get a bit smoother eyeball here. We could decrease that as we needed. You'll also notice, if I just isolate this, we got a really weird shading happening in the center. This is because all of the vertices that have been brought together at the center here using the lathe modifier aren't being welded. So we want to turn on weld chord and get rid of that. Make sure that it's removed. Something else we want to turn on is generate mapping coordinates. This should be turned on whenever you're going to need mapping coordinates on any parametrically developed model. For this reason is that you don't need to unwrap it as soon as you've done that. Now, when we look at this in the left viewport again, you'll notice that we don't have very many steps around it from front to back on the eye. So that's done down at the little spline level by going into interpolation and increasing the interpolation steps to something much higher. Maybe if I went up to 24, maybe I went to even 12, it'd probably be smoother. And I'm going to turn off optimize, because optimize will tend to try and get rid of loops, steps around when it straightens, and we don't want that to happen later on. So let's just see what the end result looks like. With 24, we starts getting even cleaner, and maybe we'll stick with that because we want a pretty nice front of this eye. Now let's make sure our eye actually fits the eye area that it's going to be going into, of course, and get it in the right spot. We might need to increase the size of it at this point, so we can see that it's not the correct size. So down below lathe and on the actual edible spline, I'm going to add an X-form modifier. I don't have the radius anymore, and so I don't want to scale the object. So the best thing to do is go and scale the gizmo, because you're not actually scaling the object at the object level at that point. One thing I suggest, though, is don't move the eye with the gizmo. So don't try and move it into place at this point with it on. I'm going to hit 1 on the keyboard and turn it off, and then move the eye at the object level into place if it needs to get shifted around. If you do it at the sub-object level, your pivots won't be in the right location anymore, and you're going to be fighting everything else when we get down to the rigging stage. So that's probably not too bad. It looks like my eye area wasn't perfectly round where it should have been, but that should be pretty good with what we're looking for. The eye looks like it's probably the right size for this character. And with that, we're just going to isolate again and into the left viewport, and we can start modeling this. So I'm just going to go see-through on this object now, and I'm going to collapse the X form in since we've got it the right size. Right-click, so collapse to, and we're back down to the editable spline. So now we can begin working with this and building this out into a proper eye. Maybe I should just show the eye again to determine where the cornea is going to be and the lens is going to be. So we're going to start with the lens on the outside. So probably with the lens starting up here somewhere. It's going to be a pretty big lens in this character. I want some pretty big eyes on him. And we're going to use the refine option and just refine right about there. And then grab that vertex. And once we have that vertex picked, I'm going to change that over to Bezier corner so that I can manipulate this a bit. Grab the invert and then move it straight out, start getting a lens. So you can see now I'm starting to build a lens in here and getting a lens shape. Now to tighten this up, I'm just going to make my XY active, and I'm just going to shove that right up real close here and try and keep it somewhat straight. And then I can use just the Y, and I pull my lens out. So you can see now we're getting a lens. So if we take a look at the end result, what we have is a lens on the eye, and we can determine whether or not it's the right size and whether it needs to be built a little larger, a little smaller, whatever it might be. And it doesn't look too bad. It looks like I could probably go a little larger. What I might not want to do is try and just move this vertex out. And the reason being is, I'm going to undo, and the reason being is you don't want to mess with your top curve here. So I want to just try again with it a little bit higher up, maybe, a little bit more based up in the eye. And then I'm going to grab the end and pull that out. And again, of course, Bezier corner, and just tighten up that edge a bit more just by pushing it up. And we can pull this straight out to get a better lens going. So that's probably a little better, a little bit bigger area for the pupil and whatnot. So again, I'm going to isolate back into our eyeball again so I can see it. I'm going to pull it back into the see-through mode. Now we're going to work on the inner eye and start getting the iris and the pupil area. So again, with refine, so just inside here, I'm going to go and give us the inner point. And again, I'm going to set that one to Bezier corner, and we're going to move the iris area in, and then I can kind of flatten out that part of the eye a little bit more. And this is why I turned off the interpolate or the optimize. And the reason why you want to turn that off is if this goes too straight, it'll optimize and not put any vertices along this edge in here. And we want those there for later steps that you're going to see. So I'm also going to go and put in our pupil. And so I'm going to put in 2 little verts really close together here. And then just grab this segment and pull it straight back. And this is going to represent the pupil of the eye, which is really a hole through your iris. And with that hole in there, we can now start getting just sort of black. You just paint this all black inside here, and it's going to look pretty good. So we could round this out too if you want to, sort of make it a pit in here if you like. It certainly wouldn't hurt to do it. I'm just going to set this to smooth, and then we could just pull this out into an area, maybe back to Bezier, and just leave it a complete hole in there. Now again, we might want to do something a little bit more interesting with this corner here and round it out. And so I'm going to go in and grab the maybe the chamfer or the fillet. Maybe the fillet would be better. And we can round it and get it rounded. Now the fillet doesn't tend to like working so well, I find, when you've got Bezier handles or the chamfer. So we want to set that to corner first. And then I'll fillet that and round it out so we get a nice edge in there. And then I can use the Bezier handle here if I like to put a bit of that shape back in. So let's take a look what that looks like as far as an eye goes. So now you've got a hole in the back with a lens on the outside. So this outside part of the mesh is just going to get a nice, shiny texture, and the inside's going to get all the color and whatnot for it. So the next step we're going to do is we're going to go in and set this up with texture and make this look like an eyeball at this stage. So for unwrapping this, I'll just take it out of see-through mode. We can see the outer, obviously, of the eye. Let's take a look at the UVWs. I'm going to hit X and type unwrap and drop the unwrap modifier on it and open the UV editor, and we can see the unwrap that's been done for this eye. So if I pick some verts at the front here, you can see that this is the front edge over on this side. And obviously this will be the back edge over on this side. But effectively we've got an unwrap that is reasonably flattened out at this point in time. I'm going to grab the entire, there's two elements here. There's the inner and the outer elements. And I'm going to grab both, and I'm just going to flatten those really quickly. So I'll just do a quick peel on those and make sure they're peeled out flat. But you're going to see that that doesn't work so well. It's going to give us this really ugly looking shape because it's getting pinched together here and whatnot. So I could just for instance do a flatten on there, and let's show that checkerboard pattern so that we can see it and see if we can adjust these a little bit and size them up and see if there's just a better way to get this shaped so that it'll fit better, and maybe something like this. Now, in actual fact, the outer polygons here are only ever going to get a sort of a shiny texture, so they may not need any real major space anyways if we want to do anything on them, just slight changes to it. But if we did, we'd want this unwrapped quite well. So with this as it is, I'm just going to leave it, and we're going to work from here, and we can play around with texture and whatnot at that point. Now, the other thing we might want to do is set up different textures for the inner and outer and whatnot, and that's what we're going to do. So we are going to go and add, and I'm going to keep this all procedural as long as possible so that we can go back and play with this. I'm just going to throw in an edit poly modifier, and at this point we have two pieces. We have the inner and the outer, and in this case we have the outer picked, and I'm going to set that as ID for a multi-sub material as ID1, and I'm going to invert that, pick the inside just with Control I, so we've got the inverted selection, and I'm going to set that up as ID2 so that we've got the ID2 is the inner. And then we can set a texture on this and start building a shader tree that is going to produce an eye for us. I'm going to work with multi-sub material to start with. And we'll set the multi-sub down to 2. Now, something else to note, if you ever drag out multi-sub materials, if you go into your options and preferences, you can change this. You can say empty multi-sub slots, which is good, so I don't want any in there, and essentially I want only one slot whenever I go and create a new one. So whenever you create a new one now, it comes out with a single slot, or maybe you want by default 2 only. You can set that up so it's got a default of 2, because you're probably going with at least 2 to start with. I prefer setting that up instead of having to change it every single time. Now we're going to be going with the outside. We're going to be going with a mental ray Arc and Design material, and the Arc and Design material is going to have a standard glass, thin geometry glass, and then we need to set up the there's a transparency on it, and I'll just show this, and we'll show the background in preview so we can see through. So this is the outer. Let's apply the multi-sub. And then I'm going to create the same thing, mental ray, Arc and Design, and that's going to be into channel 2. So in rendering now, we should see the 2 layers of texture here. So we're seeing an outer shiny level, and of course the inner dark. We're probably going to break off one more, and that's going to be the black area. To make this real easy. So I'm actually going to have the black in a separate shader entirely. So we're going to go in and set that up. So with the polygons here, let's just deselect everything. And what I want to get is everything that's on the inside here, and only what's on the inside. So we're going to need polygons. I'm going to pick those, and then make sure that we deselect everything else that we don't want, and get rid of all the others that we're not interested in. It looks like I had ignore backfacing on by mistake, and I selected that, and you can see that we've got this area here, and we can go about deselecting it. Now there is a couple other ways to go about doing this. We could do it with a ring instead. So let's actually do this a little bit better, a little bit easier way. I'm going to take a single edge loop, double click on it so that we select it, and then we're going to turn this into a face selection. So we can go about convert to face, and we've got a face selection here. Now we can just use the grow tool and grow this up and pick everything inside. So this can be a whole lot easier way of doing it. And I want to take it to about there. Now it looks like I should have picked a little, ring a little bit further back. So let me do that again. I'm going to grab a ring right there, right click, convert to face, and we'll just grow that so it makes sure it picks everything at the back. And then we're going to keep going until it hits this inner part here where it starts to wrap around a little bit, and we're going to grow it out to there so that the iris color is going to wrap around and into it a bit, and we'll see sort of the edge of it. So this is going to actually be another ID. We're going to set this up to ID 3 now, and let's set that up. So hit M, and of course set our number, and we could just use the standard that came in here. We're just going to use a black, complete jet black. We don't want any specular on it. We don't want it shining at all, and we don't want it looking like it's going to be visible at all in the final render. So let's just do a render on that. Now we'll definitely have this black pit in the center. It's going to be completely black and stay black no matter what we do. And then we need to add color to it and make sure that the iris gets mapped on here. We also need to set some smoothing groups. You'll see that we've got this edge being shown, and that's because we set the edge of the eyes over to Bezier corner, and as soon as you do that, you get a different smoothing group, even if you try and keep it straight. And so we can go in and set that smooth, real easy. I'm going to grab everything, and I'm just going to say auto smooth to 180 degrees, or you could use a smooth modifier on there, and that should probably look a little bit better when we render that out. Now you won't get as hard an edge change between them because you've applied the smoothing group to it, so you'll get a nicer, cleaner looking transition from one to the other. Now we don't have any lights in the scene at this point, but you can see how the outer is giving this glossy sort of outer feel, and it's going to be able to pick up these highlights out on the outside, and then the inside is going to have all the color on it. So let's go back and change this up a little bit. I'm going to go into the Arc and Design, and we're going to make sure that our diffuse color is white for the eye, for the rest of it. And we want to map on our eye now, and we want to be able to place it in our pupil. So I have a pupil texture, and it's a PNG with an alpha, so it's already got an alpha channel in it. And I'm going to need that in here, so I'm just going to drag and drop it in. And if you notice, I use the Fastone image viewer. I find it fantastic for sort of cataloging and working with all my images. And we're going to blend this together into this shader here. But what we want to do it is we want to do it at a different UV coordinate space, because right now the UVs for this aren't very conducive to taking a nice round pupil that look like that. So we need to be able to put that on there. So I'll just hit M and get rid of that. And now we're going to apply another UV coordinate from the top. So I'm going to this time just use a UVW map modifier, and it's going to remain planar. So we've got this planar map. I'm going to put it on the right axis. Looks like that should be X. And we're going to plaster it on from the front. So we're going to apply the iris right on from the front. And so what's going to be nice about this, we're going to be able to use the gizmo of this to sort of size it in. And just to make this maybe make a bit more sense, I'll move it forward. Now, the iris, if I were to map it on right now, is going to map over everything, because we've just changed the mapping coordinate, the map channel 1, which is what we unwrapped to, and we've overwritten it with this new mapping coordinate space. I'm going to change this to mapping coordinate 2 now. So we actually have layered UV coordinates. And in our setup here, what we want to do is we want to mix these together and have them mix. So we've got these this sort of overall shader happening here for our entire eye, and I'm going to open it up, and we want to have the diffuse color being mapped in and placed in this, and be able to work with other colors for our diffuse. So we're going to use a composite node for that. And in the composite node, we could say our base layer is going to be, and again, we'll just sort of do this with an RGB tint or something where it comes out as white, and so that's going to be our white. And then we're going to go with the rest. So this will end up being replaced with maybe a texture that has veins in it and whatnot for the eye, for a little bit of red in it, things like that. So we're texturing the rest of the eyeball. We don't want to plaster this on front and have this just sit over top of it on front. So with our composite, I'm going to plug it into channel 2, but the bitmap is now using map channel 1 currently for the mapping. So it's going to be kind of wrapped around the eye. So if we took a look at that in a render, you'll see that it's wrapping around the entire eye, and obviously it doesn't exactly look like what we want. Looks kind of funky and cool, but not what we want. So I'm going to say bmap channel 2, and we can see now that it's being mapped on the outside. It's being plastered on the front here. Now, of course, it's way too big, obviously. The pupil basically fits the iris fits that iris area. So with the gizmo, I'm going to scale that down. Let's take a look at it from the front. Should be about there, I guess. And then we can take a look at it again. So looks really cool in its place, and then we have this other funky texture happening that makes it look really strange. So I'm going to turn off the tiling, and in this case also, for some crazy reason, I may actually see the back of the eye, which would be very odd. I'm going to say turn off show map on back, and I should now have pupil showing on the front. Now I think what's happened here is, I'm guessing that if I rotate this around, I may have the texture on the back. Yes, so it's actually flipped over. The UVs are flipped over. So let's take that UV, and we could flip it in a single axis if we wanted. There we go. So I just flipped it on the U, and to get it to show up. Now we could set this to be the size that we need and whatnot. Now we have the problem that this has the pupil on it already, and the black area isn't the black area that we've worked with. So we might want to go in and do some editing on the map now and stretch the center down so that we don't have any of this black pupil showing whatsoever. It's it's all iris because we've got an actual texture here to do that with. So I'm going to go into Photoshop and then just correct that, and then we'll be back to have a look what the result is, so that we've got a no pupil in our texture because we want to be able to dilate our pupils. Okay, with an extra layer, I've managed to just create the illusion of a much smaller iris here, and we're going to try that and see if that works a little bit better. So I'm just going to save that back down, and we'll save it, and I'm just going to call this iris 02, and that's going to be our new PNG for that. So back to Max, open up our material here, and drag our new material, new eye in, and we'll plug that in, and we'll see if that creates a better look. Hide on, and then show on multi-sub, and see if that works properly. Oh, and of course this needs to be set to channel 2. Maybe that's all it was. And it needs to have the show map on back turned on, and so there's our pupil showing, and we can see that's probably not too bad. Now I'm going to scale up the UVs just a little bit, maybe to about there, and that should look pretty good. Let's see what that renders like. Seem to have a little bit of a ring around it. I'm not sure what's causing that at this point. It could just be shaders, or it could be the might be the highlights on the eye and the way the smoothing's happening. We need to fix that up a little bit more and clean that up. It could just be lighting. So we're starting to see the eye now, and we wanted to get this, maybe a bit more color in there. We could have worked on that as well, and played around with a bit more shader work or whatever their textures to make that work. But again, we're not too worried about it for this demo. So there's our eye shader now hooked up, and I'm going to go and turn this back off again just so we're not looking at that, and just say hide on so that it's not showing them. So there's our eye now, and it is pretty much functioning as it should. It's an eye. So we need to get this now rigged into the character's head. I'm going to turn off the isolate, and we have an eye sitting here with a shader on it. So let's copy that, Control V. I'm going to make an instance this time, and to get it on the other side, please do not just move it across. We've got an X value here. All we have to do is just simply eliminate the negative in front of here, and we have our two eyes in our character's head. So we can do a quick render of that, and just make sure that that's starting to look like what we want, and it's starting to give us the look and feel that we're after. So here's the final render. It's starting to look pretty good. We've got our pupils in there. Obviously some better lighting would be nice. I've got an SSS shader on the skin of Vincent here, so we can see a little bit of see through in his ear. But eye's starting to look pretty good. It's starting to go in the right directions. So now on to the rigging side of it. So now let's start the rigging and get something up set up here. So we need a control object first off, and just make sure it's out in front of the eyes. Now you can go and create your own just with some spline objects, really easy. On my website though is a set of macros that might help you. I've got them loaded in a different UI here, but it's essentially exactly the same thing. And we've got an eye control, and if I just drag that out, you'll notice that it creates a control system with 3 splines. So I want to make that about the size we need, and we're going to guesstimate from there. So that should be pretty good. So the green is going to be my right eye, and red the left for port and starboard. And then I'm going to want that centered exactly in the center, so I want to set it on 0. And I'm going to want it centered up and down on my eyes, so it's exactly centered up and down. So I'm going to use Alt-A, and I'm going to use my Align tool, but just turn off the axes that I don't need. In this case, it's just going to be a Y, or if I'm orbited around in another view, it'll be Z for up and down. But because we're looking at the view right now, this is working in view coordinates. So that's dead center of our eyes up and down. And then we can just move that out front, so it's out front of our eyeballs at this point. Now we want to set up and have these eyes look at each of their respective controls, so the ones on the sides. However, I don't want to do it directly to those. I want to be able to do it to point helpers, and always rig to a rig, and then bind your mesh somehow up to the rig. That way if you ever need to change the rig, it's very easy. So I'm going to take my point helper and turn on axis tripod and align one up to my eye, and so it's dead center of the eye. I'm going to unhide the mesh at this, the bones at this point, and I'm going to take that point helper and I'm going to link it up to the head bone, so it's following the head bone. So I'm going to use the link tool and then just drop it on, and so it's following it. So what I can do now is I can set up a look at constraint, so it's looking at this green side here. I'm just going to close my tools, and so that's going to be under animation, constraints, look at constraint, and have it look at it, and you'll see it flip over. Now one of the problems with our current setup is that if you, it might be hard to see here, but if you see that it's currently got Z pointing up, if I rotate the head over sideways, you can see that the Z axis of the point helper is staying pointing up. So what we need to do is we need to set its up node. So in the motion panel, you'll find the look at constraint. We're going to turn off world and none, and I'm going to set the up node to be the head bone again. And it might flip around, but it really doesn't matter. You can go and change things if you want, and realign it however you might like it to be. So we could pop it back. Then we just want to make sure that indeed we actually have it staying with the head and looking in the direction that it needs to look at. So it's staying up and down with the head bone now. So that one works. So let's create the other. So I'm going to make a copy of that, and just Control V again. It can be an instance, and I'm going to use Alt A and align it to the other eye. And of course now we have the problem that the it's pointing at the wrong side. So again, in the motion panel, I'm going to remove the current control and add the other, so that now both are in there. The up node's already selected, so I should be able to grab the head bone and rotate it side to side, and you can see the Z's are staying pointed up. Now if I move the control, the master control here that says eyes, the blue one, my eyes will look at the control, but I also have control over each eye if I want to be able to adjust each eye's direction and make them look in a specific way. So we can now go about the simple process of linking up the eye to the eye control, but in this case I want to do some rigging on the eye first, so I'm not even going to bother. I'm going to delete the left hand one again, and I'm going to rig up the right hand one, and we're going to rig that up so that it has a pupil that can be dilated, and that can make your animation look a lot better if you got some pupil dilation happening. So to be able to do that, we need some sort of control object, somewhere to control what that dilation is, and we're going to throw it on a spinner on the eye target here. To do that, we're going to use the attribute holder modifier, which is just a blank modifier that doesn't do anything whatsoever, and it's completely empty so that we can apply them. And under animation, we're going to roll on downwards to find the parameter editor, and the parameter editor allows us to be able to build custom attributes quickly. Now generally I would build all this via MaxScript, because all this is, believe it or not, this parameter editor is a MaxScript tool that writes MaxScript, and frankly I'm better at writing MaxScript than code is at writing it, and I can do more things with it need be. So, but for this demo we're just going to do it this way. So we're going to be looking for a spinner, and I'm going to call it dilate pupils. And if we just click down in the testing area, it'll show you what it's going to look like. I'm going to align it to the right, and I'm just going to make the width of the spinner maybe a little bit smaller. So it's smaller, and we have a 0 to 100 now. We might want to make it smaller than it currently is, so that's as a default just for now. I'm just going to say it's the range is going to go from -100 to 100 with a default of 0. And we're going to go from there, and we can adjust how far this moves, because there's also an edit here, so we could go back in and edit it. Now we want to apply it to this attribute holder modifier, which we currently had selected when we opened the tool. So it says add to type selected object's current modifier, so we could change it to whatever we needed, if in case that be. And now we're just going to say add, and now we have this nice dialogue here that we can work with. I'm just going to close that off. Let's go back to our eye now. So the way this is going to work is we're going to need to be able to scale this in and out. So we're going to go back and again, I'm going to do this kind of parametrically, so you see the whole stack. At this point, I would usually collapse all this in and remove all this out of the stack. It's important to do that. Never leave stacks in place that just don't need to be there in final solutions. But so that you can see this all the time, I'm going to leave it there. And I'm going to go with edit poly modifier. And I'm going to do the same thing I did before. I've got that loop still picked actually from the previous selection. And so I'm going to convert that over to a vertex this time. And this time I'm going to say grow. And I want to take that all the way out again to the edge of the eye, maybe even sort of more around the edge now. We can play with that. So looks like we got one more to go. There we go. So we've got the pupils selected and then out to the outside of the eye. And what we're going to use is we're going to use a soft selection. So I'm going to go turn on the soft selection. And you can see that the soft selection right now is picking everything in the eye. I'm going to turn down the fall off so it has just where the iris part is, effectively out to the outside edge of the iris. And what we're going to be doing is we're going to be scaling these vertices up and down as need be. So you can see that we're scaling it up and down, but at this point in time we're actually scaling the lens as well, which isn't what we want. So we need to turn on edge distance. Edge distance allows the soft selection to be able to follow edges, and of course it's too low now, so we can turn that up, and really you can just kind of crank the edge distance up. And let the selection now get picked up. And we want it to select all the way up to the outer edge here. And we can now scale this up and down. You can see that it's making the pupil larger and smaller. And we're going to be able to scale that up. Now, one thing you might notice, it's kind of hard to see, but up here we have it kind of doing a weird thing where it's pushing it back inside. And that's because there's this curve we can play with. And we might want to flatten this curve out a little bit and get it to scale so that the outer edges don't get pushed as much. It's more on the inner. We could flatten it both ways, but let's try that to begin with, so it's kind of scaling a little nicer now. And on top of our edit poly, because obviously scaling a pile of vertices would create a lot of animation tracks to try and work with, and there's no center point for a vertex to scale around. So we want to add an X-form modifier again. So X on the keyboard, and we're going to type in X-form modifier. And so that X-form modifier is around that selection. So that selection needs to stay active in the stack. And we're going to be able to grab now that X-form modifier and scale it up and down. And you can see if we scale it up and down, we get the pupil scaling up and down. Now its pivot point's probably in a bad spot, but we're going to play with a few things here. So we want to wire up that scale factor to our eyeball here. Okay, so I'm going to open up the parameter wire dialog, and I'm going to load the eye on the left side, or the right side, sorry, because I usually go master slave here, and I'm going to load the other on the other side, so the controlling, and we're just going to open up the modified objects and find our custom attribute dilate, and I'm going to go into the other side where our eye is, and we're going to open up the modified objects X-form at the very top, and we're looking for the scale property here. So now we're going to hook these two up. So if I get the dilate pupils to control the scale and hit connect, you'll notice it pops up this error. And the reason it pops up an error is pretty straightforward. It says unable to convert 0.0 to type 0.3. So the current controller for the scale is an XYZ value, and we're trying to type in a value that's a single value, a single float value. So we need to convert it. So a single 0.3 value just looks like square brackets, and I'm just going to copy this dilate pupils because that's our variable here. So I'm going to put an open square bracket, comma, comma, close square bracket. So we have open square bracket, dilate pupils, comma, and then cross and say connect now, and it's all fine. Now, when we go and look, you'll notice that the pupil has been completely closed. That's because we're piping in a value of 0. And if we take that up to a value of 1 again, you'll notice that the pupil is open now again. So that's fine, but generally an animator wants sort of a 0 value they can pop to, and that's the starting point. So we're going to say +1 on this. Now, strangely enough, even though we couldn't put in dilate pupils as the single value, we can go +1 in MaxScript and have it add a 0.3 on. So if I evaluate that, you'll notice now at 0, it's popped the eye opener. If I get rid of it, it closes it up. So we can say +1 on there, and it'll set it to the default. So let's just go and take a look what happens now. So with our control picked, I'm just going to lock the modify panel here, pin the stack on this so we can select other things to view them and see it. So as I scale this up and down, you'll see that the center point that it's scaling around is not exactly what we want. So one of the axes is pushing out. So we look at the local axis here. The x-axis is pushing in and out on here. So we can actually get rid of this x-axis and just give that a 0 value, because 1's going to get added onto it. And now try this, and you can see it's just pushing straight out. Now what I might want is just a little tiny bit of scale out and pushing it out a little bit. So I could actually have the dilate pupils, I'll say copy, and we could multiply that by something. So maybe times 0.1 on the x, so that when we push that, it doesn't go up and down. But again, here now we run into the problem that it's suddenly multiplying it, and it's doing something onto it. So it may not be working quite the way we want. So I'm going to I didn't say 0.01 or 0.1, sorry. There we go. There we go. So now you can see it's pushing out a little bit, but not too much. So it's still looks too much. So let's go 0.5. That looks pretty good. Now, when you look at the amount that it's going up and down here, we don't have to move the spinner very far for it to scale it very much. So what we want to do then is we want to do a little bit of multiplication first and slow this all down a little bit. So I want to say times, say 0.1 plus 1 to add the 1 back on again. So now it's got to go much further to be able to get from the high and low values, and we could even go lower than that, so that we take, we got to go further up. But now it starts getting ridiculous for the animator. So at 0.1, it felt pretty good to just grab this and scale it up and down. So now that we have that working, I'm just going to we can adjust our spinner here to work at a sort of more reasonable range. So we probably want to be able to take it down to about, negative, looks like 7, 8, maybe 9. We could even go 10 if we really wanted to sort of completely close it, which would be crazy. And it's going to go up to -10, and we'll take it up to like 20. So we're going to go -10 to 20. So let's edit this under Animation, Parameter Editor, Current Modifier, Edit. And what do we want to edit? The dilate pupils. So with that selected, you can see that it puts these values in here. So we're saying -10 to 20, and everything else was probably fine. We're going to say Apply Changes. Now that spinner only goes up to 20 and down to -10. So now it's got a a lock on it and won't go too far. And our starting point's correct. Let's go back and now copy this over. Now that we've got this all working, we can copy it over. Let's just note something about this modifier stack again. Everything from UVW map modifier, as I pointed out before, can be collapsed. However, the others cannot be. Now, we could actually collapse in the edit poly as long as we turn the sub-object level back on and make sure we're passing the right vertices up to the X-form modifier. Again, I'm just leaving this on so you can always see what we're sort of working with here. I want to say Control and make a copy of this. And we can make a copy or we can make an instance in this case, but we may even want to have a right and left dilate pupils, maybe one master one or whatever. I'm just going to say instance for now. And then I'm going to align it up to the other side. And now we can hook them in so that they're following the face properly. So let's grab or following the eye control properly. So let's grab our eye and link it up to its corresponding point helper. If you notice, I've left this absolutely to the last, and the reason being is I want to be able to adjust everything before I sort of commit to it being linked up. So I should have now face. Let's make that no longer. And we can see that we've got a targeted eyes, and we can even adjust the pupils up and down to have that work. So there's our base eye rig starting to function and looking pretty good and working quite well. So the final stage here, we're going to get the eyelid and the meat around the eye to react to the eye rotating. So as the lens rotates in the eye socket, we want that to deform the mesh and actually push the mesh out to make it feel like the eye is actually in there and pushing that information around. So let's go in and build space warp, and we're going to use the geometric deformable, and we're going to use an FFD cylinder. So I'm going to create an FFD cylinder for now about the size of the eye, let's say, and I'm just going to push it out a little bit so it's got a bit of height to it, maybe a bit more than that, and I'm going to align that up to the eye so it's in line with it, and up to the front of it. We just want to make sure that it's covering the whole area where the eye probably is going to be in the mesh. May actually need it out more for the entire mesh. We'll see what happens as we get in. We'll adjust it as we need it. So let's set some height values. So we've got 8 around it. Looks probably pretty good. There's height segments, and we can add some more height segments if we want. The radial should be probably fine, I would think, for this option. So this needs to be then linked up and following the point helper. So we'll link it to the point helper so now it actually rotates around, and just so we can test as we go, I'm going to animate our controls. First off, we may as well freeze transform on those so we can get back to the beginning point. And I'm just going to grab that main control and just move it up, and frame 20, I'll move it down. And we'll move it across. We'll go up all the way, and then we'll just take it right back to the beginning, so that we can scrub through and see as we're working on it what sort of solution we're getting. So with the head selected, we now want to go in and add a binding. So we're going to use the bind to space warp and bind the head off to the eyes so that when we deform it, it will deform with it. Now, something to note with the binding, it always sits on top of the stack. So it's going to be above your open subdiv or anything else you're using for setting it up. So let's pick the FFD. Let's go into the sub-object level for the points, and we can then start pulling points out. Here's something a bit odd. The center point has actually got multiple points to it, so we need to make sure we marquee select in that area to pick those points. But as you're pulling that out, you can see now the mesh deforming around it and growing out in that area. So I'm going to go in and grab all the points in that front. pull those out, and you can see that now we've got the mesh pulling out with it. So you can see it's missing some verts. Where it's not inside the mesh, it's not actually pulling out. So we've got our display, but we've got all vertices, and we can use all vertices to deform all of them, with a fall off then to only affect an area, so to make sure that we're only pushing that area out. So now when we push this around, you can see the meat of the eye being pushed out of the way, and it looks like the pupil is pushing the eye down. So one of the tricks here is that you want to make sure that you model the model without that deformation in it. So, some modelers will get really, really finicky, and they'll actually model that little bulge in around the pupil that they've modeled. Problem is now it's fixed, and you really can't do a whole lot with it. So we want to have that, not modeled in, so that we can deform it in during animation and place it in during the animation process. So I'm just going to take the change the radius down a little bit, maybe make it a bit smaller where this is happening, and that's starting to look pretty good. So I can adjust the fall off now depending on how much fall off this is going to affect, and work with different things like, say, for instance, the height. Get some of the values right. We could take the whole centerpiece and pull it out as well, instead of just the front ones. Whatever gets us that result that we're going to see, and you can start to see get some movement now happening on the eyes. Now we're starting to get some extra stuff off on the edges. We're going to have to try and solve as well, where the radial the radial FFD seems to cause some a little bit of problems. So we might want to reset that up with more points around it, because that'll actually help it be a little bit cleaner and won't deform it as much. But effectively, there's the end product, with it deforming and pushing the eye out of the way, and getting you a nice solution.